The year was 1973. It was a time of bell bottoms, the Watergate scandal, and the end of the Vietnam War. But on Saturday mornings, something monumental was happening on ABC. After years of superheroes being sidelined or stuck in some campy live-action reruns, the Justice League of America finally got the call to the big leagues of animation. So today we are looking at the inaugural season of one of the most iconic and perhaps misunderstood superhero cartoons of all time, the original Super Friends from 1973. Now, the 70s, it was a simpler time for entertainment, a time before gritty reboots and expansive cinematic universes, a time where Saturday mornings were a sacred space for kids across America, with magical, vibrant, and sometimes wacky world of Saturday morning cartoons. Now, by this time, live-action superheroes, particularly on television, had largely faded from prominence after the campy fun of the Batman 66 series. But animation, however, it was a different story. And into this landscape on the 8th of September 1973, ABC introduced the Super Friends. This wasn't just another cartoon, it was a massive undertaking, bringing together the absolute titans of the DC Comics universe for the very first time as a regular animated series. After it aired on the ABC network, it was becoming a cornerstone of their Saturday morning lineup. And for many kids, this was their, first introduction to the likes of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman. So in the beginning, ABC executive Fred Silverman wanted a superhero show for his Saturday morning lineup, and he reached out to DC Comics, which at the time was really eager to expand their brand beyond the comic book pages, and a deal was struck. So, who was tapped to bring this ambitious project to life? Look no further than the undisputed kings of Saturday morning animation, Hanna-Barbera Productions. Having already conquered the airwaves with classics like the Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, and the Jetsons, William Hanna and Joseph Barbera were no strangers to creating enduring franchises. And they came up with a plan aimed at creating a show that was both, entertaining and educational, often with moral lessons woven into the plots. But Hanna-Barbera was facing a challenge. A group called Action for Children's Television, or ACT, was putting massive pressure on the networks to remove violence from kids' programming, which left the writers, led by Jameson Brewer, in a tight spot, as they had the world's most powerful beings like Superman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman, but they weren't allowed to hit anybody.
What you talking about, was?
Yep, no punches, no kicks, no lasers to the face. Instead, the heroes spent season 1 dealing with misguided scientists, environmental disasters, or an alien who just needed a hug. The genesis of the Super Friends, it really goes back to the success of previous animated endeavors featuring DC characters, most notably Filmation's The Adventures of Superman and the Batman Superman Hour that aired in the late 60s. But they wanted to create something even grander, uniting the major players under one banner. So, who would be the team? Of course, the absolute A-listers of the DC universe. Characters that had graced the comic book covers for decades. So we get Superman, Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman. But Hanna-Barbera felt this all-star lineup needed relatable entry points for kids. Enter Wendy Harris, Marvin White, and Wonder Dog. Wendy was the brains, Marvin was the, well, he wore a cape. And he tried his best, I suppose. And Wonder Dog provided the Scooby-Doo-esque comic relief. Unlike the later Wonder Twins, Wendy and Marvin had no superpowers. They were just two teenagers who apparently had high-level security clearance to hang out in a government-funded fortress. Why? Because it was 1973, that's why.
Oh sure, that makes total sense.
The scripts, while often constrained by network mandates, were crafted by a team of writers dedicated to bringing these iconic heroes to life in a way that made them accessible to a younger audience. Now, as to how much they took from the source material, well, this is where things get interesting. While the characters' core powers and origins were respected, the Super Friends operated under some very strict guidelines due to the ACT censorship and a desire for non-violent educational content meant that the show often deviated significantly from the action-packed, darker tone of the comic books. Villains were rarely outright evil, often misunderstood, or just misguided. Fights were minimal and physical altercations were, God, almost non-existent. Instead, the Super Friends relied on their brains, their powers, and often their ability to convince the antagonist of the error of their ways.
Well, it seems I was wrong.
Not only was the look of these characters really important, but the voices behind these legendary characters were just as crucial to their enduring appeal. And for many kids of a certain generation, shall we say, these were the voices of their favourite heroes, which included Danny Dark, who lent his commanding voice to Superman, embodying him with this paternal authority. There's Olin Soul, who became the definitive voice of Batman for an entire generation, a role he had played in previous animated iterations. Then there's the legendary Casey Kasem, already a household name, brought this youthful energy to Robin. And then we had Shannon Farren, voiced the iconic Wonder Woman, giving her strength and grace. We also had Norman Alden, and then later Ted Knight for some episodes, providing the voice of Aquaman, the King of the Sea. When Super Friends premiered, it was an immediate hit with its target audience. Kids tuned in weekly, eager to see their favourite heroes tackle new challenges. And look, ratings were strong, solidifying its place in the Saturday morning lineup for years to come. Season 1 ran for 16 hour-long episodes. Yep, that's right, hour-long episodes. And in 1973, these were massive blocks of television time. Now, look, it performed well enough to stay on air, but ABC wasn't sure about the hour-long format, so they went back to the drawing board and rebooted the show 4 years later in 1977 with a shorter, more action-packed episode style in the all-new Super Friends hour. The legacy of the 1973 season is massive and can't be understated here. It gave us the Hall of Justice, which became so iconic. It was eventually brought into the actual DC Comics canon. And interesting fact is the iconic Art Deco Hall of Justice headquarters was actually inspired by a real-life building, the Union Terminal in Cincinnati, Ohio. It is also a functional train center and museum hub. Most modern fans often roast season 1 about for being, well, boring. There were no supervillains, there's no Joker, there's no Lex Luthor, hell, there's no Brainiac, and no epic battles like in the comic books. Just 60 minutes of the gang stopping a guy from accidentally freezing an ocean or stealing the world's power. It was safety first, Justice League. Even with some of its shortcomings, this show became the blueprint for superhero cartoons. It established a formula for a team-based superhero animation show that would be refined and expanded upon by future seasons of the show itself, Justice League Unlimited, and even Young Justice. As far as home media releases go, the original 1973 Super Friends existed largely in syndication on TV and some Blu-ray VHS recordings. In the late 80s and some early 90s, individual episodes and themed compilations began appearing on VHS from distributors like, of course, Warner Home Video. These were often pan-scanned and didn't offer much in the way of restoration. They were a bit rough, but they were a nostalgic treat for many of the fans. But with the event of DVD, Warner Home Video released 2-volume DVD box set of the original 1973 Super Friends Season 1, which was released in 2007, presenting the 16-hour-long episodes in their original broadcast order with remastered audio and video, bringing new clarity to the classic animation for the time. And only just recently, we have had the Blu-ray version released on the 10th of September 2024 in the form of an entire Super Friends series box set with all 93 episodes from all 9 seasons of the show, remastered for Blu-ray, providing a major improvement in the picture and sound quality. But for those who want 4K HD, as of this video, there are no dedicated plans to release the show on 4K. However, given the push for classic animation in some higher resolutions, it's not outside the realm of possibility for a future, say, anniversary or special edition, maybe down the line.
Shut up and take my money!
Now for me, this first season of the Super Friends is the one I don't really recall watching as a kid. It was released a couple of years before I was born, but I can't even ever remember it being in reruns, shall we say, to watch it on TV. Not like, say, the later seasons, which I saw all the time. So for me, watching this was really watching it for the first time, and to sit down and watch it, I'm like, wow, it's hard to think how the Super Friends started like this. But I can see all of the elements that made the later seasons great, as this show was way too long, as an hour per episode. Every story element just seemed to be dragged and stretched out to fit this hour-long time limit. But to top it off, we get Velma, Shaggy, and Scooby-Doo. Sorry. Wendy, Marvin, and Wonder Dog. But look, let's face it, it just as well might have been Scooby and the gang, if you know what I mean. Now, look, don't get me wrong, it was great to watch it, and I'm glad I own it, I really do. But it's also not hard to see why this is probably, at least to me, the weakest of the 9 seasons, shall we say. It's definitely worth owning on physical media, that's for sure. And it's also great to see, shall we say, the foundation for what the Super Friends become later on down the track. For me, I would probably give this more of a maybe an 8 out of 10. It's definitely one to own, but it's probably not the best of the Super Friends. The 1973 Super Friends may seem quaint by today's standards. The animation was often, well, limited, and the plots were simplistic, and the villains rarely posed a truly existential threat by any means, that's for sure. But to dismiss it would to be missing the point entirely. This show is a time capsule of what represented a moment in time when superheroes had to be teachers as much as they had to be titans. It's slow, it's brightly coloured, and it's undeniably charming. It introduced generations to the ideals of justice, courage, and friendship, making the larger-than-life characters feel, well, relatable and sometimes inspiring. But most of all, it taught us that even if you can't punch a bad guy, you can still save the world with teamwork, a giant computer, and a very clumsy dog. Next week on the show, we're going to look at a rare forgotten gem that is the 1988 Ruby Spears Superman cartoon on DVD. So make sure you come back and tune in for that one. Thanks for watching.